So we've got just one more minute, right? Move that over that way so we don't get too much. It's still, that'll be okay. All right. And welcome everybody. It's exciting to see so many faces here this morning. Does everyone have a copy of the handouts in front of them? I think we've got enough to go around for everybody to have. This is what we're going to show on the screen. There's nothing different there, but it's not always easy to see what's on the screen. And for those of you who are joining us at home, if you're playing along at home this morning, then perhaps we can, if you want a copy of what we've gone over today, you can email me, jclarkson at calvaryfletcher.org. Bob, I've made this thing green. I don't know what that means. We'll find out. But we are so grateful that all of y'all are here, and I'm going to call on our junior warden, Jim Hall, to open this meeting with a prayer.
Good morning, friends.
Good morning. Good morning.
Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Lord, let me know clearly the work which you're calling me to do in life, and grant me every grace I need to answer your call with courage and love and lasting dedication to your will. Amen.
Amen. That's a prayer that comes from the Vocare program. If y'all are not familiar with Vocare, it is a program of the Episcopal Church that works particularly with young adults and invites them into a discernment of vocation. And so that prayer is very fitting with what we're going to talk about today, because here at Calvary we have been in the midst of a discernment process. You may not have been as aware of this as I would have liked, because we've been trying to do this in the midst of a pandemic. And, you know, my thought about how you do planning is you have big meetings and you get everybody together, and that's just not been possible in this time that we live in. And so it's been a little bit upside down in terms of how we have gone about it. But we have had conversations as a staff, both in sort of a retreat type setting, as well as our weekly staff meetings. We have talked about this process. We had an assessment with a small group of parishioners, vestry and a few other folks, that the Episcopal Church Foundation has put out, and that can help identify some direction there. A lot of this work has been happening in the context of vestry meetings. But as you know, we sent out a couple of weeks ago a congregational survey, and we're still receiving responses to that, but those responses have already been very helpful. And that survey is both online, and we have or can make paper copies in the office if you would like to get a paper copy of that. We're having this meeting now and kind of talk about where we are, and we'll have future opportunities where, again, once we can kind of gather together and do the larger meeting and have discussions in that context, we will certainly do that. But the question is, how do we hear God's voice at Calvary now? Where do we hear God calling us to in our life as a community? And the place that starts is, what do we understand to be Calvary's values? This really helps us connect to who we are now and where we have come from. So that this is not something that we are doing tabula rasa, as they say. This is not a blank slate. This is growing out of who we are and where we have come from. And we try to discern where we see God's vision of hope in the world. And that vision may be larger than Calvary and what Calvary can accomplish. But that's, given the lens that we're looking through, what does God's hope in the world look like for us? And then how is God calling us as Calvary to live into that hope? That calling is kind of our mission. But in terms of the church, it's more of our being called by God as opposed to our inventing a mission on our own. Within that calling, within that vocation, what areas do we need to focus on? How do we understand our calling in terms of the specific areas in which we work or live as a congregation? And then what steps do we need to do in order to follow that calling more closely on a daily basis? And now this is a process. Usually when you do a process like this, you will do that over the course, you'll do that with the idea of we're planning for the next 3 years, we're planning for the next 5 years. A lot of, when you hear people in business talk about strategic plans, they may be strategic plans for the next 5, 8, 10 years. Long-term planning in this environment is 6 weeks. So part of what this allows us to do, we hope that we will get to a point where we can say, okay, over the next 3 years, this is what we want to do. But as we look out towards the next 6 weeks, this allows us to say, well, as we're making choices, do we choose this or that? Well, let's look at the framework that we have and make those choices rather than either what's the easiest or what do I think we ought to do. This allows us more of a framework. So I'm going to ask Jen if she will talk just a little bit about the areas that we have been discerning and focusing on.
Okay, so in investors, we've been talking about these particular vocational areas. And again, go hard, don't wait, it's your call, it's your call. So how can you participate with us in the church? So fellowship.
Yeah. Could you please take your mask off so we can hear you?
Sorry. So in investors, we've been talking about our vocational areas, what it means, what are we called to? So we're going through fellowship, gathering together. How does that look? Formation, back to our foods and formation times we had before this giant pandemic. How does that look now? What's our mission? What are we going out to do as a church in the world? Worship. How are we worshiping? What do you come for? What are you called to do? Our administration, our facilities. So the grounds, the people that are here working throughout the week, not just Father Jay and Mother Ann and Deacon Jackie. Our facilities, our buildings, our grounds, all that good stuff. So that's where we're looking and that's where we're going for now. So what are you called to? Where are you going to fit in it?
And in that discussion, the areas of fellowship, formation, and mission have really come up as areas in which we can improve and grow more. But that takes resources. And so I'm going to call on our treasurer, Ted Hill, to talk about the resources that support this work.
Thank you, Jay. There are three colored charts you'll see in your packet. Start with the first one. I like to have an idea of what I need to get money forward before I decide how to get that money. The first chart you see is projected expense for 2022. There's not order that, but what it will take to fully fund the operations and missions, locations, if you will, of Calvary for calendar 2022. Now, I did the numerical analysis of this in September, when all I had as final numbers were through August. So I extrapolated from prior experience and rule of thumb, if you will, what the rest of 2021 would look like, and then apply that kind of rationale, extrapolated that out, to come up with estimates of the cost we can expect to see for 2022. As you see, there are a number of categories that are familiar. They incorporate dozens and dozens of separate accounts and separate expenditure classification, but we have to pull it together into something meaningful. So, if you look at this, the large slices, obviously, and this is so in any organization, is the staff and, in my case, staff and clergy. The next largest one we have is debt service. We borrowed $900,000 and we're repaying that gradually. And then the various other operating expenses that parish incurs during the year. But all told, it's estimated that we will have an operating budget in 2022 of $654,000. So keeping that number in mind, I'm going to move on to the next chart. And this is the projection of the sources of income we would need to have to fund that operation. Can someone turn off the coffee? Anyway. We have some items that we know are dead certain what they would be. For instance, the lease income, what we paid by angles on a monthly basis. I can tell you what that is for 2022 to the penny, just as I can tell you exactly to the penny what the debt service will be next year. The rest of these are, except for parishioner contributions, extrapolated estimates. I think they're reasonable. I can't say they're accurate, especially in the current environment, but they are reasonable and give us a basis to start. But the gorilla in the room, obviously, is parishioner contributions. Well, we actually generate money from our assets, the leasehold, renting space in the church, various other things. What the parishioners give in terms of pledged amounts, unpledged amounts, and undesignated contributions is going to be the lion's share of it. We're looking at about $349,000 needed for next year to fund our operations. There are things in here that you just can't project. I do not include in this investment income. Gain and loss, one, most of our investments are restricted as to what they can be used for. And two, if anybody can tell me what the stock market's going to do next year, you're in the wrong building. So at any rate, these show the percentages and raw dollars and thousands of what we're going to need to raise to fund next year's operations. The third chart, and I'm going to share this with Jay, I'll tee it up, is that total expense divided up by vocational area. Now, this means we take the expense categories and allocate them along the five categories of vocational expense that you see here. You'll notice, if you make a comparison with the chart, that one slice, the blue slice for facilities, is pretty closely matched by revenues we'll generate from the lease and from rental, building use fees, So that sort of is a self-funded amount, if you will. The rest is sources of other income, but it's largely parishioner support. And I think, Jay, did I tee that up for you well enough?
Yes, thank you. I think that, we're in an unusual position as a parish in the sense that our facilities, expenses, and this way of dividing up the expenses, is largely taking the staff and clergy salaries and distributing them across these areas, most of the fixed costs you can pretty much figure out. But we're in a pretty unusual position as a parish to be able to say that our facilities needs are met by sources of income other than parishioner contributions. So the cost of repaving the parking lot, the cost of utilities, those are all in that blue section. And so it gives us the opportunity to say, what are we called to do as a parish, and how does our financial support, if the pie gets bigger, the areas that are not in blue are the ones that grow. And if the pie gets smaller, the areas that are not in blue are the ones that shrink. And again, that is a direct correlation to parishioner giving. And because of that, that's why we are continuing this process of discernment to say, particularly in the areas of fellowship, formation, and mission, which doesn't mean that we can't talk about the other areas, but particularly in those areas, what is it that we as a parish want to see? What is it that we want to do? Where do we want to focus our energy? Because that's the area that parishioner support is directly contributing to. And so that leads us to the question, and I'll turn it over to our senior warden, Steve Rarick here, at least to the question about what comes next.
Thank you, Father Jay, and fellow parishioners, for attending our meeting this morning. Ted said I'm the big gorilla in the room. And both from my physical stature, I'm not missing more too much. But what we're going to discuss briefly is how do we participate in a stewardship campaign as it relates to us, the parishioners. And as you can see from the previous pie, can you put that pie back up, because that's key.
Which one?
The next, no, the one that you had up. Yes. God has given us a lot of flexibility. We are indeed a very fortunate church. I came from an Episcopal church up in West Virginia when I left there for 10 years, and we struggled, and I mean struggled. We are given an opportunity for much of this, how should I say, opportunity we need to strike fast. And as you can see here, this is taking care of us. All we have to do now is enjoy this other portion of the pie chart. And we can do that with your help. Much is given to us and much is expected. And I want to emphasize something to those of us who are 72 and older, that RMDs can be a way of perhaps helping the church in a magnificent way. And I think those of us who were in that category know what R&Ds are. We can give to the church, reduce our tax burden, and have a tax write-off instead of giving it to the feds. At least we know where our money is going, as opposed to not knowing where our money is going. So I beg you to really look and discern in what you want from us and what we can give to you by simply, and I hate to use the word dollars and cents, but it comes down to dollars and cents. The more dollars and cents we give, the larger portion of this pie will occur. I thank you for your attendance here today, and please look at this as a real opportunity. God has given us an opportunity. Let's take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Steve. Thank you, everybody. I want to add one piece to Steve's request, and that is that you continue to pray for Calvary. We're in a period, so I was out, I'm going to try to say this without ruining Mother Nan's great sermon, because you need to hear the sermon. So I'm going to use the analogy of the garden. I was out in the garden on Friday, and I want to, in full disclosure, I was out there in my supervisory capacity. There were people getting their hands dirty. That was not one of them. But I observed, and what I saw were people spreading hay, spreading mulch on top of the beds. And as Pastor Doug, our garden manager, told us, that allows the microbes, the microorganisms, the different things in the dirt that are there over the winter to continue to grow and be active and make the ground fertile for what comes next. And where we are as a parish here at Calvary is that we have been, in some ways, mulched over for the winter during this period of the pandemic. But that things have still been active under the surface. And now the question is, what do we want to plant? What do we want to grow? And how bountiful do we want the result to be? So I invite you to pray and ask for support in the discernment of how we both as a community and individually support this. So, all of this being said, and boy, y'all were good. I said I wanted to take 30 minutes, we didn't even hit it. So, but I do want to offer the opportunity for questions. If folks have questions about any part of this. Yes, Mike.
The one question here says pledges of 275,000.
Mm-hmm.
Does that include a 22% increase in giving, or is it 22% increase in giving in addition to that?
That is a 22% increase in pledged gifts. Now, there are, of course, unpledged gifts that we receive as well. So that would be, the 275 would be a portion of what we need overall. But that just gives, I think, each of us a guideline to think about as we think about our giving, to consider what we're capable of and how far we might be able to go. Thank you. Other questions? So the doctrine of the Trinity then, okay. Yeah. Well, again, but thank you for being here, and please stay tuned because we will have further opportunity for folks to participate in this process of discernment as conditions allow. And if you have not done so already, fill out that parish survey because that will be very helpful. So, one last chance. So I'm going to call on Jen to close us again with the Vocari prayer.
Great, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Lord, let me know clearly the work that you're calling me to do in life, and grant me every grace I need to answer your call with courage and love and lasting dedication to your will. Amen.
Yeah.